Thank you very much indeed. The first thing that I'd like to say is, members of the committee, please could you turn on your cameras and confirm your audio is working before we go live, which is supposed to be in the note that went out beforehand, but if everybody could check that their system is working okay. So at the beginning of the meeting, good evening and welcome to this meeting, the Environment Select Committee. I am Councillor Will Pascal, and it's my privilege to be chair of this select committee, the Environment Select Committee. This meeting is being held in accordance with government regulations on holding virtual meetings. Please bear with us if we run into some technical challenges during the meeting. This meeting is being held via Microsoft Teams, live conferencing, and all committee members, council officers and parties who wish to participate in this hearing are joining from remote locations. The event is also being streamed live, and members of the public and media are welcome to follow the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. I would like to welcome any first-time viewers to the Environment Select Committee. And firstly, before we start, I think it would be very appropriate for us to start with 72 seconds silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy.
Thank you, Chair. You're just on mute, Chair.
Apologies. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask members of the committee to mute their microphones and only to unmute themselves when they're going to speak and when they're addressing the meeting. And as also that once they're done, they should mute themselves again. Likewise, to save bandwidth, I would ask that councillors only switch on their cameras when speaking and remember to switch them off after they've spoken. If a councillor wishes to speak on a particular item and has not been called to speak, please indicate by typing the letter capital Q in the conversation column, or chat column as it might be called, by drawing and that will be the only way in which we will take questions. There has been some confusion in the past by different methods being used as well, but I think we're going to simplify it tonight by having the Q in the chat and that's the only way. If I missed somebody who's got their Q in the chat, I would ask officers to prompt me and make sure that I take people in the order that they've asked to speak. I would also ask everybody not to use the conversation column or chat column for any other comments, and to remind you that they can be seen by all participants and they also retained. So we are in a public meeting, and therefore do not use the chat column for any other purpose other than putting a Q in there. To assist your fellow customers, officers and members of the public watching online, to identify you, please state your name before you speak. If for any reason your connection drops out and you miss something, please let us know. If my connection drops, I nominate Vice Chair Councillor Charles O'Connor to take over the meeting on my behalf, on all our behalves, and I will rejoin obviously as quickly as I can. The next item is attendance and declaration of interests. I have no declarations of interest to make regarding any of the items on the agenda myself, and I also would like to ask officers as if they had a notification of people who would not be able to come to this meeting. So officers, have you had any notifications of people not being able to come? Shall I take that as a no?
None that we're aware of.
Right, okay, that's fine. Now, the next job that I have is to ask members one by one to confirm whether they are present and whether they have any interest to declare. So obviously, if you could switch on your microphones to speak. Councillor Erin Aretti.
Present, Chairman, no interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Marwan El Nagi.
Present, Chair, no interest to declare. Thank you.
Councillor Alison Jackson.
Present, Chair, no interest to declare.
Councillor Charles O'Connor.
Present and nothing to declare.
Councillor Laura Round. I had a text from her that she said she might be late, so I think maybe we should say that she's not here at the moment, but hopefully she will join us soon. Councillor Portia Thaxter.
Present, Chair, no declaration of interest.
Thank you very much. So let's go on to the minutes of the previous Select Committee meeting. The minutes of the 12th of October 2020 meeting have been circulated with the papers. Does the committee agree to sign them, or that I should sign them off as a correct record? Or are there any particular issues of incorrectness or outstanding or whatever that anybody would like to raise? If you could say now, because if I don't hear, I will take that as an agreement. Okay, so everybody's agreed that we should sign the minutes off. Thank you very much. Now, the first item of substantive business is item A4. This is a paper that has come to us with regard to 2030 carbon zero commitment, the carbon neutral pathway. So I think that this is under the lead membership of Councillor Johnny Thalasitis. Johnny, would you like to lead on this, or do you want one of the officers to take it? I must say here, I won't say it in relation to every paper, but I assume that all members of the committee have read the paper, so we're not having a full presentation. What we're having is a supplementary presentation and drawing out of key points. Then we will ask questions of the lead member and officers from the committee. So if we could start off with A4, Johnny, would you wish to lead on this, or do you want officers to do some summing up for you?
Thanks, Will. I'm pretty relaxed either way. I think the paper speaks for itself to a large degree, and I'm happy for officers to introduce it.
Right. Terry, is that you?
Thank you, Chair. Yep, I'm happy to talk through the report.
Could I ask one thing as well? Sorry for cutting across you. I understand you have one of your consultants with you, so I'd be very happy for you to introduce the consultant as well, and if they would like to make a few additional points to yours, I'd be very happy for us to hear those.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've got Katerina Young from the consultant, which is Aoife, and she's the project manager overseeing the carbon neutral pathway exercise that we're conducting at the moment. So I'll keep my presentation brief and let Katerina do the talking, because she's got a presentation. So hopefully that will be informative and answer a lot of your questions. So the report itself really looks at sets out how we're developing the carbon neutrality pathway. It's sets out the progress to date, the kind of key stages are involved in that, and what the outputs will be. So as you mentioned before, the council's set some quite challenging carbon neutrality targets. So for 2030, all the council operations should be carbon neutral or net carbon zero, and then as a borough, so that's all the businesses, residents, etc., we should be net zero by 2040, which is quite challenging. So in order to achieve those, we're starting now is a carbon neutrality pathway exercise, which will set out the route that we need to take in order to achieve those targets. And it's divided into three phases. So there's phase one, which is building the evidence base. So we need to know what data we've got at the moment, where our emissions are coming from, and looking at those admissions and what to include in the scope of this work and what not to. So that work that's started back in October, and we're finalising that now. Phase two is the actual route we need to take. So what are the measures that we need to take in order to achieve that carbon neutrality targets? And it's looking at the different models and scenarios we need to really deliver on that scale, pace, and the range of interventions that we need. And that's potentially looking at business as usual, accelerated ambition, and some of the systematic changes that we need as well. And then it's looking at some of the cost benefits around, or the costs, I suppose, of delivering those initiatives, and some of the policy reviews and stuff that need to take place as well in order to make us achieve those targets. So that's a real whistle-stop tour of the report. And the consultants led by Katerina started back in October. So they've done some fantastic work around scoping of the carbon neutrality pathway, identifying what should be included and what shouldn't, and we can get an update from them now. So if I introduce Katerina Young, who is the project manager overseeing this, and there's a presentation which hopefully will appear.
Yeah, I was going to say, first of all, welcome, Katerina, and secondly, do we have the means for your presentation to come on the screen?
Hopefully someone from governance can bring this.
Is that Tom or somebody different from governance?
Thanks so much, Chair. Is someone able to make me a presenter? Someone has just made me a presenter. Thank you.
Okay. Possible you could make Katerina share her screen. Let her share her screen, please.
She should be able to. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant.
We're there.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone, for inviting me to present. So I think I've met some of you virtually before, but I'm Katrina Young from Ether and the project manager for this piece of work supporting the Council on their climate action. So a brief overview. I wasn't sure how circulated the report that the Council has put together was, so I'll skim over some parts perhaps that everyone has already seen, and we can go into more detail in some of the other areas. But so briefly, the project, as Terry mentioned, has the 3 phases. The first to develop greenhouse gas emission inventories for the council and the borough with the respective 2030 and 2040 timeframes of net zero. The second is then to model different scenarios of ambition of action and how they might get to net zero by those timeframes. And then third is a cost-benefit analysis, looking at the economic and social impacts of the actions in those pathways. So this work is one piece of the climate emergency action, so developing the evidence base and the pathway analysis. There's a lot more work further down the line that will need to be delivered. So this is the establishing the council's position, as it were. So just to set out some definitions, the 3 commonly used phrases around this area are zero carbon, net zero carbon, carbon neutral. In effect, the difference between them is whether there is any removals or offsetting considered. So zero carbon is imagining a world where there is no emissions at all of greenhouse gases, whereas net zero carbon and carbon neutral allow the balancing of the emissions against any removals or offsets. And there's not really any difference in practical terms between carbon neutral and net zero carbon. And that is the definition that the council have chosen for their targets. They've also chosen to go with CO2e, which broadens the scope beyond just carbon dioxide and includes other greenhouse gases of methane and N2O. Just introduce the different scopes. So this is also a terminology in this area. So we have different levels of scopes of emissions to be included in the targets. So we have scope 1 as the direct emissions. So that occurs at the point of use. So this is things sort of stationary fuel combustion, gas in houses. Scope 2 is emissions as a consequence of grid provided electricity and heat. Scope 3 is basically everything else that occurs indirectly from the activity within the boundary of emissions. It's worth mentioning at this stage that the targets and the timelines that the council has set are ambitious, as Terry said, and the targets cover sources that are not all within the direct control of the council. So you've got areas like the council estate, which you do have control over, but then you have different spheres of influence. So you have some strong influence over perhaps contracts and procurement, but then national policy and private sources, that is covered in the targets, but the council has little to no direct influence over the emissions in that source. So it's just acknowledging that this will be a challenge, this will be difficult, but it is the strength of the target that you're leading from. So to go over what we've done so far on the project, so we started work in October. Ether is the lead of the consortium, so there's 3 different partners. Ether, we are leading on the inventories and the modelling. CAG consultants are leading on the policy review, and SE2 leading on the stakeholder engagement side. CAG are also leading on the cost per benefit analysis. So we held a scoping workshop in October, and this involved members of the council and officers discussing what should be included in the targets for 2030 and 2040. So this was considering all the different sources of emissions and different scopes of emissions, and we'll go on to those later in my slides to show what the outcome was. We then followed on discussions one-to-one with different departments to confirm what data would be available, and as part of the policy review that CAG led in terms of identifying what actions have already been delivered or committed to, and what actions are already planned. The policy review is identifying the gaps and assessing the current actions in the council's work programme, and we'll be using that for part of the modelling to identify the areas and the level of ambition and where it needs to increase in particular. So we've also done various stakeholder engagement activities, so internal in the council and external. So the scoping workshop was an internal workshop, so just council officers. But then council officers, particularly with Anchor, has been leading discussions with internal departments and external partners, particularly with key stakeholders in the borough, so large sources of emissions potentially, and then there's future engagement sessions with the residents and more distribution of material on this theme within the council staff. So this is a very colourful slide showing a diagram of what sources of emissions will be included in the council's 2030 net zero target. So in the black dotted line, those are all the sources that we'll be including in the modelling and that the council have decided to include within their action plan for reaching net zero. All the sources in the purple dotted line are sources that the council decided they wanted to include in the action plan and in the target for net zero, but at this point the data for these sources wouldn't be available at the right level of detail, so that if it was included in the modelling, any action taken to reduce those emissions wouldn't be reflected in the modelling. So we've kept those separate for now to indicate that they are going to be included, but it doesn't make sense to include them in the modelling at this stage. So and then in the red dotted line, those were sources that were discussed and considered, but decided that they weren't going to be included in the net zero target for various reasons, either that they're a very small source and the level of effort required to gather data on the emissions was disproportionate, or that there's someone else, another actor who's more appropriately placed to take responsibility for those emissions. The colours, the blue boxes are scope 1 emissions. So referring back to the previous slide about the direct emissions. So that's basically gas supply and direct vehicle emissions of the council. The green boxes are scope 2, so that's grid electricity. And the orange boxes are scope 3, so that's all the indirect emissions. The red boxes are where there's still data gaps. So this is relevant later on when I present some draft emissions from these sources. So the red ones are areas that we're still waiting for data to be gathered or communicated. This is the following slide for the borough target for 2040. So the same setup, everything in the black box is including the modelling and the action plan. The purple box is just for the action plans, not included in the modelling at this stage. And in the red box, that are sources that won't be included in the modelling or the action plan, so are outside the scope of the 2040 target. Colours are the same as before, so the different levels of scope 1, 2 and 3. So these should say that these the scopes of these last two slides at the scoping workshop held with the council, we presented some initial straw men, if you like, of scopes, and they were then given the opportunity to discuss in small groups what they thought should be added to the scopes. And we, after the workshop, we then collated all the input from all the groups and discussed this further with the council officers to come up with these final agreed scopes of the targets. So if I move on to some draft results of the inventory based on those scopes. So the council has previously had mission targets and mission inventories, but any numbers of those will be related to a smaller scope. So for the council missions, this scope, so everything that's included in the mission inventory, has increased quite significantly from any previous inventories. So don't be alarmed, perhaps I should say, in terms of if the emission numbers that I'll be showing are significantly higher than anything you've seen before in inventories, because a lot of sources have been added, which is to be commended. It's in the spirit of a net zero target. It's all very well declaring a climate emergency, but then deciding to have a very narrow scope of emissions rather than be ambitious and including everything as far as we can that we think is appropriate for the council to be taking action to reduce the emissions. So these emissions here are for the borough target for the 2040. They're for the year 2018. The data sources that we use, particularly for the borough, but also some of the council emissions, they typically have a 1 or 2 year time lag. This is an artifact of mission inventories, is that they're not as up to date or recent as we would like, but it is it's standard practice basically to be a year or two behind, and 2018 is the latest data that we have for all data sources, and that will be the starting point for the modelling that we do. So the emissions here are based on the scope of the 2040 target, everything except waste processing. We are still clarifying some of the data for that source, so that will be added to the graphs here. But we can see that the commercial and industrial emissions within the borough make up a significant proportion of the borough-wide emissions, followed by residential, so the houses, the gas and electricity use, and then followed by the transport as another key sector. And I just wanted to highlight that the magnitude basically of emissions from the council scope. So the council emissions occur within the borough. So everything of the council emissions are included in the borough, but they are a relatively small amount of those emissions. So in comparison, the work needs to be done to reach the net zero by 2030 of the council emissions is a small but necessary step to reach net zero for the borough by 2040. So the next slide is the 2030 target. So these are the emissions for the council. These are not complete. There are a few data sources that we are still missing. Key is the housing data. So this is a new source to be added to the inventory from previous council inventories, and various fuel use data from contractors of highway maintenance and facilities management, and fuel use in care homes. But we can see again that buildings make up a key part of the emissions inventory for the council, followed by street lighting and various different transport sources, so from the council fleet or for waste collection vehicles. There is a unit change in these, so the council emissions, the graph is showing in tonnes of CO2 equivalent, whereas the borough-wide emissions are in kilotons of CO2, which is 1,000 times larger than tonnes. So, still to come. This is we've currently been in phase 1 of the pilot project. The next phase is to continue the data collection, so to complete the emission inventories, and using the policy review that CAG have led with the council, we will use that as a starting point for the modelling of the net zero pathways for the council and the borough, and then those actions that we are proposing in the different scenarios will have the economic and social impacts assessed, and those will then be formed into a potential timeline of how the council can reach the targets based on various different actions. So what needs to be done by when. We will include a discussion on offsetting. So this is the idea that if the emissions in the scope of the targets cannot be reduced to absolute zero by the target deadlines, then there is potentially offsetting of those equivalent size emissions elsewhere. So the next step is that the draft report we provide the council in December will be reviewed internally, and this will be followed by a validation workshop in February to interrogate and assess the work that we've done in terms of the actions proposed in particular, whether they're realistic for the council, but whether the assumptions are valid, and then we will revise our work again after that to take into account all the stakeholder feedback to be finalised by the end of March. That's all I've got to present at the moment. Thank you very much, and I pass back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Katrina, for that. The first thing is that, as usual, if I could ask on behalf of the committee whether it be possible for you to supply the slide deck to officers so that they can circulate to those who need them. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
The second thing is that I wanted to ask whether the work that you're doing is going to reflect what I think is a particularly timely and important parliamentary bill that is going through this month. I think it's report stage this month, and it'll become enabled as a bill in the spring, which is the Environment Bill and its various parts, setting up new office in Whitehall and various other angles of it. Along with that, I'm I'm not surprised that buildings are the key this issue. But the key question there is as to whether your work will be informed by the environment created by the Environment Bill. Sorry about the pun, going through Parliament at the moment.
Two different levels of answer, I guess, to you in that respect. So the base data of projections that we use have recently been updated by BASE. So these are projections on business as usual fuel use and grid carbon factors for electricity. So those were updated last month and will be used for the base assumptions for our business as usual scenario. We will then be modifying those assumptions for the further ambition scenarios based on policies like this. So if the Environment Bill has concrete parameters that they're looking to change and set targets, then we can incorporate that into our modelling.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. And I think for everybody's information, I came across this by reading a report from an MP in a local residents association magazine this last week, and I knew a little bit about it, but not enough. So I asked Ryan McGowan to do a briefing note, and I'd just like to say publicly thank you to Ryan for doing it very quickly and with a lot of information in it. And I would ask Ryan if he could circulate to committee members and also to officers and lead member a version, perhaps not as long as he sent me, but a version of this report that he supplied to me, outlining what the Environment Bill is aiming to do and its timing, etc., which is very useful background stuff, because I think it creates the weather which we're operating within in a national leadership sense. Now, before we go on to questions from the committee, I would like to do something a little bit unusual and ask for another contribution to assist me in a question that I want to raise. Could we put the slide of RBKC Council GHG emissions boundary 2030 up again? It was the one that had various things within scope. Is that possible? Yeah, that's the one. Right. Now, I think this is I mean, in terms of this select committee, whilst recognising there's a 2040 objective, we have decided for the moment, as part of our working group, to focus our efforts on the council's 2030 target rather than the 2040 borough-wide. We're going to recognise that, and we will include as much in our report as we can, but we realise that it's a much larger job and does involve a lot of outside partners outside the council. When your report comes along, we will aim to include scrutiny of both the 2030 and 2040 aspects of it. But as far as our immediate work is concerned, we're focusing on 2030, which is why I've asked for this slide for scoping. Now, the question that I want to ask, but also I'd like to involve David Hughes in this, who works as an officer in the council on procurement. Now, that's why if you look down scope for action plan, bottom left in purple, other procurement services, contracts and suppliers, purchase goods, it's particularly those two orange ones on the bottom left. It struck me in a meeting I went to on the environment sustainability when we were discussing the scope, but also in another context as well, that fundamentally things happen in the council when you get a combination of policy and practical plan, but it all comes down in the end to process and money and budgets and so on. And those all need to come together before anything really happens. It's not being pejorative about any particular part, but it's the synergy of different aspects of the council's activity that make the bedrock of a council's decision making, be it through the leadership team leadership team meeting, or be it through delegated officer decisions. So what I said I said as much in that meeting, and received. I was surprised, to be pleasantly surprised, to receive considerable support from David Hughes. He hasn't had the opportunity to prepare a paper for this meeting today, but if he could shed some light on why he thinks it's so important from his professional point of view, and then I think I would like to agree with my colleagues that we ask him to come back with a formal paper for our next meeting. So, David, if you're there, over to you.
I am, Chairman, and thank you, and good evening, members of the committee. So it's really good to be with you this evening. I think for me, we've recently introduced the commissioning and procurement strategy of the council, which the leadership team approved, and also a procurement code for officers to follow. And one of the key items within that is how, as an organisation, we meet our corporate social responsibilities. So this includes climate change and the environment emergency and sustainability, but also includes things like social value and community wealth building, equalities and diversity, our commitment to modern slavery and preventing modern slavery, also to ensuring we pay London living wage or living wage to our staff and contractors, and a number of other commitments. And for me, there's a real opportunity for the council using what you're doing here in terms of the climate change and the carbon zero commitment, to look at how we give good support to officers who are both commissioning and procuring goods and services, to consider the carbon impact and the carbon reduction options they have before them as they are looking to commission and procure services. And I think there's a lot of work we can do with Terry and his team to how we inform and shape the kind of options that can be considered. I think it's important then we get into the decision-making processes, an understanding and an explicit sort of setting out of what the carbon impact of key decisions that are being proposed are and what options are being considered. And then moving on with this and with other sort of corporate social responsibility aspects, how we capture those decisions and monitor them to make sure that they're having the impact that we expect them to have and we want them to have. So again, this is how I think we can contribute from a procurement perspective to the carbon reduction target and the zero carbon target for 2030 by how we build these things in more robustly and more explicitly into the thinking around commissioning and procurement, but also the decision making and the proposal of options and consideration of options and making recommendations to members in terms of the key decisions that come before you. So I think for me, there's a lot of good work I think we can do to link in with what Katrina and Terry have described all there. They're very much so in terms of the pathways report they're looking to produce in early 2021 about how we can support officers and support the council in terms of how it makes steps towards meeting this commitment.
Thank you very much, David. What I'm really asking is that I would like my fellow committee members, if possible, to agree that we recommend that David Hughes come to our next meeting with a fully worked up briefing on how Carbon Zero 2030 will be achieved by each and every financial decision, capital and revenue, made by either officers or lead members and leadership team. In essence, does the decision comply with the departmental workstream Carbon Zero 2030 plan, as is all departments are being required to prepare for the ESSB, the Environment Sustainability Board and Green Task Force, a plan how their work stream will contribute towards the Council's achievement of 2030 carbon zero. And together with that, to understand the risk inherent in existing assets and contracts. So that is the ask that I'm making of my fellow committee members to agree a recommendation that we ask David to go away and examine that and come back as a properly tabled paper, having consulted with his colleagues in the normal scrutiny fashion, and giving him time to do that and do it thoroughly so that we can have a further discussion of this in a bit more depth at our next meeting. Is everybody agreed with that? Or rather, should I say, is any of my colleagues on the committee not in agreement with that? Is everybody happy? Okay, thank you. And David, is that a reasonable ask of you to
It is indeed. It is indeed, Chairman. Look forward to coming back to the committee.
Because I think when we discussed this previously in informal discussion, when you were briefing us on factual background, you said that to come with a paper that you'd need some time to prepare it. So I think
Indeed,
our first meeting in the spring will give you that time.
That's very helpful, Chairman. Thank you.
So thank you very much, and thank you everybody. Now, that was a bit of a diversion, but I think it puts on point in the council processes internally a bit of action there. If we could go back to Katrina's presentation, I think this diagram is fascinating. One minor frustration was that when it was published in the circulated documents, I found it illegible. So we got officers, and Hannah, thank you very much for doing so, to send around an enlarged version, which is better. But I think that at a very nitty-picky thing, I think generally it would be good if we could have visuals that are as legible as possible. Block colors with typed information on the top. And if they're at the definition that we're seeing them on the screen now, they're very good. But once they go through the distribution and printing process, unless you've got a high definition printer, they're not always very legible. So I think it's a point that we might generally pass back through to scrutiny officers and also officers generally. But having said that, maybe starting with this one, because you've had the time now to read it and look at it and examine it and think about what Katrina said. Are we happy with the positioning of the blobs within the boxes, to put it in simple terms? Or are there any questions people would like to ask as to why things have been allocated in the way they are? Because this is pretty fundamental to the work that Ether are going to be doing. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, I do, Chair.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Catherine and Terry, for this very interesting and informative presentation. My question is, how would you collect the evidence and data for the population mentioned in order for us to achieve our goal? And how are we going to target individual household?
Thank you, Councillor. So I suppose it depends on the actual source of the emissions. So it's going to be a complex task. It's not going to be easy to be able to achieve or collect all that data. Hence doing this kind of exercise now, just to kind of set out what is in scope and what the different sources of emissions are and how we can actually go about actually collecting that data, because it is going to be a real challenge, especially for the 2040 target, because there's a lot of the sources that aren't really in direct control by the council. So as part of this exercise, we are looking at how we can actually obtain the emissions data that we do have.
Thank you.
Now, Portia, I also wanted to say that I very much welcome your participation in this committee, and I know that you're passionate about the condition of housing, and we'll discuss it on another day in more detail. But I'm still keen that we look at the warm homes and that aspect of the council's housing stock. I know that when Ether get further into the data on that both you and I will be very interested in the problems, but also the leadership that's being shown on a scheme which went to a key decision posting today, the Blank West refurbishment, which I think is going to be an exemplar of how to do social housing and in the borough. Refurbishment of an existing stock to the 2030 standard and all sorts of other refurbishments as well, but it's not just the comfort. But thank you very much for your participation. Has anybody else got a question that they would like to ask on this item?
Yes, Chairman.
Please. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Terry and Katrina, for such a great presentation. My question is, well, it's not really a question, but it would be good to see in the report the most challenging list that would be really hard to get evidence of, and the least challenging, and also a plan B for the most challenging tasks. as you said, Terry, 2040, the going carbon zero is probably the most challenging thing, and things such as, individual households or whatever, you think that's the most challenging. It would be good to list out some of the items that would be most challenging for the council to achieve, so that, we know how we could relate that to our local residents. Thank you, Chair. That's my question.
I think that's a good point, and I think that we will look forward to further updates from Ether, including the addressing of that point. Has anybody else got a question to raise on this one? I've got one final point I'd like to make. I have made it before, but I think it bears making again. Is that I'm a great admirer of the lead member at the time who prompted the commitment to 2030, and that admiring that commitment, because it looked pretty ahead of the pack at the time. But as things have moved in the last year, if we can think of the light at the end of the tunnel of COVID, and the other issue to do with, was it 20-something miles of sea to our east, that this area of environment and climate change is something that is consistently been at the top of our residents' agenda. So the commitment by 2030 is ambitious for our own stock and our own operations. But our process of dealing with that commitment, we are now 1/10 of the way into the programme, or the time that we had available when that commitment was made. And we'll be 1.5 through that programme by the time that we have Ether's report. So my question that I want to leave with Ether is as to whether there are parallel exercises that could be done to take action now, even before we have their report available. And I would point them in the direction, as I've said, of Lank West refurbishment, because I think they've smelt the coffee. They know what the problems are, and they are addressing it with spades in the ground in the new year. Now, I think if you look at the nigh on 10,000 social housing stock of various constructions and age and condition that we've inherited back from the TMO post Grenfell, that refurbishing that stock to achieve a 2030 target is not only going to be difficult, but it's going to be more difficult if the volume or cadence of doing it is slow at the beginning, and the realization of the effect that this is going to have on the HRA is going to require some central government support to achieve the target. So that's why I mentioned the Environment Bill, because hopefully there'll be some government finance for local authorities coming alongside that. And then there are more subtle issues as to whether the benefit of the investment bears in terms of the benefit on the resident or on the owner of the property, which is the council. There's a big difference between fabric first and heat pumps first approach, which may achieve the same objectives in a high level analysis. So we must be careful to recognise the pace, but also the detail and the social consequences of what we do going forward. So if I could draw this particular agenda item to the end and to an end, and to thank Terry Oliver and his officers, and to thank Katrina and Ether for their presentation, and also to thank Johnny Thalassitis, who's under his leadership this area of work falls. And if we can move on to item A5, and ask that we have the presentation. I think Tim Davis is leading on this, and again, unless Johnny, you wish to lead yourself on this.
Actually, Councillor Pascal, I think this falls under Councillor Will's leadership, though I suppose there's probably sort of adjacent to my area.
This has been a change. So I have had an apology from Councillor Will in relation to this item. She did want to be here, but because she's only just inherited the portfolio, then I think we're relying on Tim Davis to lead us on this item.
Okay, and I'll chip in if I can help.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Good evening. Well, first off, we've got it was a brief paper just to give an update on where we are with, in particular, with the wardens and the NSL project, which has been running in Earls Court. Wanted just to remind everyone that the CREST team is more than just the wardens. We've got the noise and nuisance team, the construction management team, network management, waste and street scene enforcement, the parks police, as well as the new warden service. I don't know how long we can keep calling them the new warden service because they've been running for nearly 6 months. And at the time of putting the paper together, they'd actually sort of carried out nearly 2,000 actions linked to 850 odd cases of antisocial behaviour and enviro crime. The antisocial behaviour is a key point here because the wardens are the bit between the police and the frustration of residents who can't get the police to do anything, but the wardens are there to fill that gap. I just ran the figures which we're using from the Power BI. Councillor Pascal, you've seen the demonstration of Power BI, and we're happy to show other councillors and have access to it because it is a live database. You know, it's updating now with the noise and nuisance officers who are on duty tonight, dealing with various complaints, etc. The point of the table was to show the wide range of work. You know, the wardens will, on their way to having a word with a beggar, moving on somebody who's playing their saxophone in the wrong place or too loudly. If they spot dumped rubbish or waste bags that shouldn't be there, they will do the online report, and that will be passed off to their colleagues in waste and street scene enforcement to deal with. You know, they'll pick up graffiti issues as well and report them on. And they do touch on all the other bits and pieces. You know, they do see drugs, paraphernalia, and they occasionally pick out the brothel, sex carding issues, particularly in Earls Court and along the Cromwell Road up near the Sainsbury's, which has been a problem as well in the last few months. We also put the data in to show the wards. It's a snapshot. It doesn't show any ward is any particularly worse than the others. It might be because we're spotting more things because we're spending more time there with the wardens. It's not an exact science at the moment. We haven't been running long enough to sort of say how things are. But it's interesting. You know, the Dalgana ward came up very low. We don't know if that is because the wardens are getting caught up in other things, and by the time we get through the Dalgana ward, you know, it's just the wrong time of day or whatever. But Abingdon, Brompton, Handstown and Earls Court continue to be the high flyers in terms of issues. And then there's a spread through the other wards as well. And it's down the right hand side in the comments, it's just a snapshot. If it's begging, if it's busking, if it's street drinking, it just seems that it's just how people are feeling or what the feel is of them being out on the ground. They see a very different thing to other teams, the wardens in particular, and the NSL guys in Earls Court. You know, they really are at the coalface. They are dealing with it live, not reported quite often. They're bringing it on themselves by being there. And we've concentrated the warden work in certain areas in the last few months on the begging hotspots, trying to deal with the busking, which is increasing as London gets a little bit busier. The busking issues go up. They've been helping out with the School Streets project with the arrival of parents in vehicles in the mornings and the evenings in certain schools. And continue with the COVID-19 related work because that is really important and at the forefront of sort of public health and the associated issues. The weekly meeting we have at the the virtual town hall on a Thursday morning picks up across the piece all enforcement teams or all teams out on the streets. So it might include the rough sleeping advisors, for example, in conversations about what is going on across the borough and the challenge of work as it comes in, and what residents are raising with us. So that's part of the task. And we're also beginning to look at the data now. The weather data is quite interesting because we have been able to backdate it, in particular with noise and nuisance complaints over the last few years. It's obvious, but it's good to, for example, work out how to populate the rota, because if we don't need the staff, we can save the money. If it is going to be cold and wet and it's not payday, and we know it was quiet for the last 2 or 3 years at the same time, the noise and nuisance team manager can just make sure it's got the right numbers of staff on, and we can figure that out with the warden offer. On a cold, wet, damp Saturday night, if we haven't got a history of complaints, we will just run a minimum service and then concentrate them being available when we know we're going to be busier. So that covers that. The other section was just telling you about the NSL report, situation in Earls Court. So some of you would have seen various reports back. It has worked out very well in terms of the feedback we've had from some of the businesses and the residents. They are different to our wardens because they are based in one place. They're patrolling a small area. People get to know them, get to know they're coming. Maybe they work out the tricks to avoid them. Who knows? But they are dealing with a cross range of issues, whether it's parking or builders or skips being put down without permission, etc. And beginning to serve fixed penalty notices. Not beginning to have served a lot of fixed penalty notices for everything from littering to scaffolding to skips, etc. It has reached its 3 months peak in fits and starts over the COVID time, and there will be a more detailed report, particularly with regard to figures and how the costs are being met to quite a large extent by the fines and the level of payment of fines. Because it's all very well issuing 100 tickets, but you need 50 or 60 of those to guarantee to be paid to start making a contribution towards the salaries and the cost of the enforcement officers. And that's the end of the report. I'm happy to take any questions. And I'm aware that Councillor Pascal's got more detailed questions about the customer service offer that we have.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Before I open it up, if I could ask one question. I think I mentioned this before, and we have certainly discussed it on an informal basis. Has there now been a meeting between yourselves in your directorate and the customer services officers with Sophie Ellis with regard to how working together in terms of information and integration between CREST and customer services with the objective of achieving a more customer orientated or resident orientated service without the S, so that it's more integrated as it's seen from outside and it's easier to access through the council portal. And as I understand it, there needed to be a meeting of minds and systems of all sorts between yourselves and Sophie Ellis's team. Has that made progress?
Right. So yes, the good news is that has made progress. There's a couple of things to highlight. With Sophie Ellis's support, the offer to residents will be an in-house offer, so we won't be using Fix My Streets. It will be an in-house form system that will be based on the Microsoft platform. The board, which is pushing through the project, so that it's not just a lift and shift of current service offer for residents. This is where I get slightly lost. The IT platform at the moment is going, and we're going to move to the Microsoft version. And rather than just take what we have and dump it on the Microsoft version, the idea is to produce an improvement now There's a project board that's running. There's already been a meeting. There's various short-term things that are being done and forms being changed and improved. So as we go through the spring, the offer will look different and will be more efficient, I am assured. And then in the background is the discussion about the future databases. That's a discussion that's now started. But in a nutshell, things will be different. I don't think you'll see a massive change very quickly, but it will be better by, there will be an improvement sort of from the end of January onwards in terms of how customers access the system. And the idea is to try and get to this stage where it is just one form for everything, and it'll be shifted off to the right enforcement team straight away.
Okay. I mean, in summation, it sounds like a good work in progress, and it sounds sensible for us as a committee to ask you and Sophie Ellis to report together to either our first or second meeting in the new year. If I could leave that with you to go back to Ram McGowan and Hannah to table that in, and it would be very useful to have an informal briefing offline in the meantime, sort of in January or something, to get a bit ahead of that curve, because I think it's a very exciting prospect, and it should lead to a better service for residents, but also potentially some efficiencies and more effective use of highly qualified professional resource within the council by the correct investment. There was an IT system budget signed off, I think, in a KD of about £500,000 to enable this to happen, and it's good to hear that that's being used, or potentially being used, to good effect, and to solve some of the perennial problems that ward councillors had previously in trying to find which particular silo to apply a problem to. So it's a very interesting report you've given as a work in progress, and if we could have a further one at a future meeting, that would be very good indeed. And if I could, I think if I could ask for questions, but I think Councillor Marwan El Nagi, you had an interest in asking a question here.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks so much, Mr. Davis, for this overall view for the work here. Actually, I was going to ask about the integration and the system as a whole and the capturing of data, but Councillor Pascal beat me to it in a good way.
Sorry, apologize.
No, it's excellent. Well, that means we are excellent in tune of where we want to be in the future in terms of effectiveness, and we don't want to blame technology, but the way we are going to put it to use. So my question, just on the outset here regarding the table, I can see, for example, on the table which following from section 5.4, the 4 items on the top constitute the 50% of the reported cases, whether it's dump rubbish, bulk waste, graffiti to some extent, but the commercial dumping. And this is really worrying in terms of quantity for the whole reported cases. So how the warden, would they report these issues? Do they, on their handheld devices, do they take picture how this work is integrated at the moment with the dashboard? I just want to see from operation perspective how this is done. And the other thing is, I came across the wardens when I was walking in Kensington High Street and in Maxilla Walk in my ward in Nottingdale, and they are really excellent. I saw them; they are well engaged, very alert, and I really welcome as well the work with the local police in terms of some aspect of things we are facing locally. But if you can just highlight to me just the capturing of data and how this is being reported in line of what Councillor Pascal, we are heading for full integration with customer services and so on, just at this moment.
Okay, we'll start with the data. I think we'd love to show you the dashboard so you can drill in, see everything that's being reported, and we can arrange to show that to you, and then you can have a look at it whenever you like. And you can see it in live time. It is very, very impressive piece of kit. You can see, residents. You can tell them how much good value they're getting for the services we offer. The simple way we're doing the rubbish reporting at the moment is as if you were walking down the street with your phone or your mobile device. They're using the same form as the residents do, and then it drops it into the system and it goes off to the right team because they're filling in that particular form. And it does look like a lot, but that's 14 officers over a certain period of time, working from 7:30 in the morning until 11 at night. So if you average it out, I don't think it's as earth-shattering as it appears, but it is interesting that it is a lot of the problem around the borough, and sometimes those black bags are linked to a property where there's not enough bins, etc. And the antisocial behaviour is actually to do with the fact that the place is an HMO, or not a very well run rented setup, and then they actually liaise with one of the teams in environmental health, the private sector housing team, and get the other things that are obviously wrong with the building, because if they can't sort the rubbish out, everything else behind the scenes is generally bad as well. But if you like, we'd very much like to show the dashboard.
I would thank you for that, Tim, but also I'd recommend that you do take up his offer, Marwan, because I had that demonstration, and it is brilliant, and it's going to get a lot better if we get that link up that we've both talked about there. Can I ask, is anybody else got a question on this particular paper?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Davis.
Has anybody else got a question on this particular paper, or can I say thank you to Tim Davis and look forward to his return with Sophie Ellis next time, and the lead member for that matter as well. So that's I think that we would welcome Councillor Will very heartily into this discussion, and I think it might be a very much more interesting debate then. Perhaps we should allow a bit more time, but the substantial paper about how we get the tech to work, but also how, my experience of wardens too is that they have helped with this terrible time of COVID with some very practical issues about how people should be outside shops or pubs, or walking along the street, or working alongside all sorts of other issues. And it's too facile to say, but it's a bit like having the old-fashioned Bobby there, who's a wise person who knows who to tell if something's wrong, and I can get other assistants in, but is somebody who is very much a upfront service to the local residents, and I think that I'm looking forward to the opportunity of picking up the invitation to go out with a warden and around my local ward patch to see how they see it, because I think it's going to be very interesting. So thank you, Tim, and we'll see you again in the not too distant future. So if we could move on then to paper A6, culture plan. Now, who is going to lead on this one?
I can, Chair, if you like.
Right.
Okay. This report is basically just provides an update on the approach we're taking to produce, or to build on the current 1-year culture plan, and to look to extending that to a 4-year culture plan. The report kind of outlines or recaps on the extensive consultation that's taken place to date, which kind of led to the creation of the 1-year plan, and sets out the kind of next steps in developing the 4-year plan. So just to recap, basically it was originally intended that we were going to have a 5-year culture plan that was going to outline how as a council, we'd work in partnership with some of the fantastic kind of cultural institutions and the local community to deliver the council plan priority, which is a place of culture to visit and explore. So we did have a huge amount of work went into developing the 5-year plan, and that's kind of listed out in the report. And I think we engaged with over kind of 2,000 organisations and businesses and residents in that process to produce that plan. And that was intended to be launched in late spring 2020, but unfortunately due to COVID and the pandemic, we couldn't do that. So what we decided to do, especially because the kind of cultural sector and kind of hospitality sector was really influenced or impacted by COVID, we wanted to really focus the culture plan on trying to assist and support the cultural sector in the borough. So we produced a 1-year plan instead, and that had 55 actions in it, and that went live in July 2020. And there's some really good progress being made on a lot of those actions at the moment. So we've had kind of the digital carnival. There's a lot around engaging with the different cultural institutions on like mentoring and training programs, really engaging around our kind of arts grants and encouraging grassroots activities. So there's a lot of activity that is going on as we speak as well. But what we want to do is look at building on that 1-year plan and developing a 4-year plan, which will take us to our originally intended like 2025 deadline. So we've got that kind of 5-year span planned out. So as it sets out in the report, what we want to do is kind of pull together a draft 4-year plan in February. We'll circulate that around and consult on that. And the intention is to have the new plan up and running for kind of later in 2021, once the 1-year plan expires. We want to engage as much as possible within that process as well and build on the kind of extensive consultation that's happened originally in developing what was the 5-year plan. But we had a cultural conversation or creative conversation in September where there was 132 people attended and represented various different organisations and cultural institutions across the borough, and that really looked at exploring how kind of culture plays a central role in the borough's recovery to COVID. And there's some really good discussions there, and there's some discussion points that are listed in the report as well. It's kind of looking at high streets, how we involve younger people, how we involve older people throughout the throughout the borough as well, and really kind of showcasing some of the really great stuff that does go on in the borough. What we're planning on doing as well is having another creative conversation in January where we can continue that discussion and really focus in on some of the key points which would be beneficial to include into the new 4-year culture plan as well. So that's the intention, is to have another creative conversation in January, and then that will start finalising the production of the draft 4-year plan, and then we'll consult on that, and hopefully by kind of the summer we'll have the 4-year culture plan to launch and get on and deliver.
Thank you very much, Terry, for introducing the paper. I have to say I went to the conversation in September, and it was an interesting event in itself. It's the first time I'd had experience of teams on a multiple breakout and corridors and all sorts of other imaginative things, places to meet. But what was strong about that conversation was that it represented what the organisations and individuals represented there covered a very wide range, from the large institutions to individual artists to residents, and all sorts of different aspects of the borough. So it was a cultural experience in itself. Now I know that Councillor Alison Jackson is very interested in this area. So perhaps, Alison, if I could ask you to ask the first question or make the first point.
Yes, thank you very much, Terry. That is great. Thank you, Chair. Really, I am very interested in this area, and I'm very pleased that you're doing a 5-year plan, because that way, you know, the arts and culture can grow and develop and blossom, and with the approach of very much on consultation. And I was chairing the Chelsea Forum in Culture the other day, and it was very interesting because that was part of business and economy as well. But there was overwhelmingly the interest was in the arts, and how in that particular area it was very important to the residents to have new arts and big up heritage. And because things were disappearing and they felt the area was dwindling into nothing, and was in danger of becoming a sort of non-area, when it in the past has had such a significant reputation, which was created a destination site for that area. So, I mean, we talked about hyperlocality, so you get local living, which is probably going to be very much a way forward in the future because of, you know, internet shopping and also then COVID. And then the idea that there's a wider attraction to the rural borough of Kensington and Chelsea as well, which is people actually want to come here, so that each area could be hyperlocal as a destination site, overall attracting people from outside in different types of business. Because what happens, you know, with places closing down, so Arcadia and King's Road, or Peter Jones doing Click and Connect. So looking to the future with your 5-year plan, how do you incorporate this? And it was really kind of a holistic approach, integrating arts with business, so that, you know, suggestions that business, because there wasn't much written about that in your culture plan, that how businesses can be encouraged in the planning department, perhaps, to use their spaces for the arts, which could attract people within the borough, but also outside the borough. And how to, you know, I'd be very interested to hear more about your views on how to integrate those departments so that it works across all departments, which I know you've talked about in your culture plan, but how that happens. And is it difficult to involve business in getting this huge job done? Because RBKC is famous for its culture and its arts, and it's sort of disappearing. And it would be a great shame if all the high streets just were, nothing was really happening in them, when there's potential to encourage people to be involved in the arts and big up what we've got. And at the moment, there's not a lot, you know, it's really disappearing. There's been nothing in the 90s, and it's sort of, you know, I love the carnival. And I love the way that went digital. And I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on digital, because there isn't that much in the culture plan. So I know you've had other things to think about, but it'd be very interesting to hear about that.
Terry, would you like to pick up on that?
Thank you, Councillor. Some really interesting and good points raised there. So I think businesses are one of the key stakeholders we really do need to work with, and they provide a huge opportunity, I suppose, in progressing, especially like the creative industries throughout the borough as well, and trying to maximise the opportunities that they can deliver. So there is quite a lot of work going on around developing the high streets. There's lots of kind of business improvement districts being explored, and how that can utilise or improve and animate a lot of the high streets in the borough. So whether it's Kings Road, High Street Kensington, as well as kind of Portobello as well. So definitely realise there's an important role for businesses to play here as well, and it is about kind of maximising that. So it'd be great if we could even meet offline as well and discuss ideas that you have around that as well. We are obviously, and I know you played a real key role in that as well, working with kind of organisations such as the Kensington and Chelsea Art Weekend as well, which kind of adds kind of public art trails and stuff to really entice people in to areas and really animate those spaces. So it's looking at developing initiatives like that and making those bigger and kind of bolder moving forward as well. And that kind of links into some of your points you raised around digital as well. So it's kind of finding that balance between having physical attractions when hopefully we can actually meet in person again and actually go and experience these things in person. It's a mixture of having those kind of interactive personal experiences as well as kind of the digital, because we all saw Carnival this year was an amazing success when it went digital, had over kind of 6 million people actively engaged with that online. So it just does show how we can really embrace, I think we have to embrace both kind of digital and in person and kind of physical improvements. So hopefully that answers some of your questions. But as I said before, Councillor Jackson, it'd be really useful if we could meet up and use your expertise in this field as well to really kind of make sure that the culture plan does reflect that.
One thing that I wanted to add at this point was that maybe there's something we can learn from the last discussion that we had, because what both you and Alison are saying, in a sense, is that we need to have both physical experience, but also a sort of 24/7, 365 digital hub that feeds off what's already happening in the borough, but tells people about it so they can find their own personal pathway through it, maybe through a digital access. And I'm thinking that the CREST Power BI system might have some clues about how to collect a lot of data about what is already going on all the time in live time. And then you could apply to that a structure of how to present that to people coming in with inquiries, or how to promote things, or join up the dots, if you like, between different organisations. And one of the things I experienced as mayor was when the cultural weekend was on, of course there was a lot on and we all knew about it. But when it wasn't on, most of those artists and individuals and organisations were still doing stuff that was very interesting. And there were lots and lots of organisations that were not involved in that weekend. No disrespect to them or the weekend, but there's so much going on, you know, even now during COVID, that could be presented more powerfully and thereby be more attractive and more interesting to people who are residents and visitors. Now I've got a couple of hands up. Officers, I haven't got it in I can't find in my chat. Who's first? Marwan, perhaps.
Can I ask? Yeah, thank you for this interesting piece of strategy regarding. I join Alison. That's it's fantastic to look forward. Hopefully, we'll get out of this pandemic and we rejoice together as a vivid and very diverse borough. And what I would like to see there as well is an element of trade and food, or international food, because every community, they have this different color in their what they call it, mix of doing things outdoor. So hopefully when we can do events in addition to drawing, arts, film events, when we capture these vivid environment and music, to incorporate food as well within that cultural diversity, will be great, as well as trade, like people, the different countries. We have so many embassies here. So if we can see their cultural attaches involving with us in terms of reaching out for our local population, will be great, Terry. And thank you so much for this comprehensive report.
Terry, before you answer that one, can I ask Portia Thaxter? I think you got your hand up. Would you like to contribute?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Terry. This is very interesting indeed, and I'd love to be a part of it. I would like to also say, considering our cosmopolitan population, are you aware of the population makeup in Kensington and Chelsea? And with the ethnic minorities, Caribbean, African people, they don't have businesses or shops within our community because of the gentrification that's been going on. I mean, how are we going to display this heart, our cultural heart, on a visual basis in order for people to feel welcome and appreciated?
Thank you, councillors. So if I quickly just go back to the previous comments. So I think incorporating kind of international food and trade is a really fantastic idea, and we would definitely look into that. The diversity question is extremely important. So we've got an extremely diverse population within the borough, and as part of the consultation that we've done to date and moving forward as well, we really want to make sure that the culture plan does reflect that and kind of really embraces and celebrates that as well. So I know through the digital carnival this year, which is fantastic success as well, but there's a huge amount of additional projects. So we had a Black History Month grant scheme this year, which worked really well. There's a number of public art trails as well, and we're trying to encourage kind of the more grassroots activity within the borough as well, or entry level posts as well. And there's a lot around developing podcasts to really kind of and inspiring young people to get into the creative sector as well, and setting up kind of mentors and internships as well if we can as well. So there's a lot around kind of the training side of things, which I think we can really look at focusing and making sure that we really do embrace the kind of diverse population within the borough around that. There's a number of actions already within the council, sorry, the culture plan that we're developing as well, and there's a lot around kind of focusing on North Kensington and a lot of the estates as well, and making sure that the population, the whole of the borough, has access to some of the cultural institutions within the borough, which are absolutely world class. So it's making sure that there is that access, and we're looking at kind of working with schools on a cultural passport scheme. So every child within the borough should kind of be able to go to, say, the 11 key attractions within the borough and kind of get their passport stamped to say they've done that as well. So it's looking at various means of kind of engaging the community from schools right through to kind of older people groups and stuff like that. So there's a huge amount of work being done there, but I'm aware that the new plan also needs to kind of set that out very, very clearly as well, what we need to do.
Thank you. Councillor Moretti, you got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Terry, for that presentation. I'm just checking, would the religious centres and the faith groups be part of this culture plan, or is that excluded, or are you planning to?
It's a good question. So we want everyone included. So there's not been a particular focus on kind of faith groups at the moment, but we can definitely look at that in the new plan as well and make sure they're fully engaged in the consultation we've got planned as well. So yeah, there's not, I don't think there's any actions at the moment where we're focusing on kind of faith groups or religious activity at the moment.
Is it part of the framework, or
like I said, we want to involve all the whole community within the borough as well, and faith groups play an important part in that as well. So can definitely involve them in the consultation and then have that discussion to see kind of what actions we can progress from there.
Yeah, I would love to see something in that region.
Thank you. So I haven't got any other hands up. Just on that, if I could just comment. Sadly, my mayoralty was somewhat curtailed by COVID, like a lot of other people's activities in different spheres. But one of the things that I was beginning to do with Verena Cornwall and other officers and the mayor's office was to work together on bringing together different faith groups. And we planned to do it in a way, actually, where we were going to have food there. To take Marwan Nangagi's point, was one of the best ways of getting different groups to work together is to show the brilliance of each other's cultural background in terms of food. So that was an interesting conversation you might like to revisit, but it depends on who is the current mayor and whether they wish. I wouldn't want to try to influence another mayor's programme, but you might find it worth asking. Now, Alison, did you want to come back with a point?
Yes, I just something quickly that I thought about, because you mentioned guardians in your culture plan, which I love the idea of, which I'd love to know more fully what that means. But because I think to create hyper localities or communities, strong communities with an identity, a local identity throughout the borough, like the Kensington High Street identity, the Kings Road identity, the Latimer Road identity, would it be, do guardians mean like a kind of panel of local people for that area who know the area well, who can help with arts, culture, funding, business connections, that can create a hub for the culture and art in the area? And maybe a youth council or a youth.
That sounds like a very, very interesting conversation. I think Terry asked you to have a conversation with him offline as part of his development of the culture plan, because this is only a report of work in progress. So rather than debating that now, could I encourage you to take up Terry's suggestion of meeting up, and that we get a further report from Terry at a later meeting?
Certainly.
Because I think that requires a little bit of detailed work.
Happy to extend that offer as well to any of the other select committee members as well. If you do want to meet to discuss this, then more than happy to.
Well, Terry, when you consider what you've got in mind, if you'd like to put round it through Ryan and Hannah, put round an invitation to the members of this committee, that would be very welcome.
Will do.
Thank you very much indeed. So, gentlemen, ladies, could we move on to well, first of all, to say thank you, Terry, for that one, and move on to item A7, because we now need to have the briefing on the greening supplementary planning document. But this is, by the way, before we get going on that, we had hoped earlier on in the year that by now that we'd be actually looking at the greening SPD, but for various reasons it's running a slightly slower programme, which I think, in view of the urgency we had under the 2030 discussion, may be necessary, but it's unfortunate. And I would like to emphasise that I think this is a very important constituent to the Council's response to its challenge of 2030 achievement, and needs hopefully to be ready as soon as possible. So not only content and why, but also when would be my overall question. So who's going to present on this one?
I can introduce briefly. Well,
right, Johnny, thank you.
I completely share your view, by the way, that this is an important constituent part of our 2030 vision. And I think not only for what its content will be, but also for the evidence base that it produces, which can inform the local plan, which of course will be able to set new policy that sort of overlays what's come in the previous local plan review. In terms of the timelines, I too think it's regrettable that we haven't been able to get a full document to you yet, but I have now, only in the last couple of days, really had a chance to look at a draft document. I'm encouraged by what I've seen, and I'm very happy to work with the committee offline to go through that. It's going to be shared more widely over the coming weeks. and I'm excited to have scrutiny of it.
Thank you. Would anybody like to ask any particular questions on the greening SPD? Or should we, is anybody, have we got a, sorry, we got, these are, I think they're old hands I've got up at the moment.
It sounds like people want to see Messi versus Ronaldo. We're 10 minutes in.
I thought you were one or the other, but anyway, right. I don't have any. Portia, is that an old hand or a new hand?
It's an old hand, Chair.
Sorry. Okay. Well, shall we just note then the report and look forward to the interaction? I think the what we're relying on you, Johnny, is to come back to us through officers and invite us to meet with you offline, perhaps before the next meeting for a briefing, and then we can decide how and when we wish to have a formal scrutiny of this in our public meeting. So thank you very much. So item A8, Royal Brompton Hospital SPD. So Johnny, do you want to start with this one?
Well, yes. I mean, hopefully people have read the SPD and they're encouraged by what's in it. It obviously is part of our campaign to save the Royal Brompton Hospital. We totally oppose any move from the Chelsea site to places like Lambeth. I think this is a strong document that sets out how we can retain and enhance medical use on the site in a way that's totally viable. There's no reason at all why the Brompton should feel compelled to move in order to meet their medical aspirations. And if they wish to stay, they have the support of great swathes, in fact, probably all of the Chelsea community. So that campaign goes on. Please do respond to the consultation and help us strengthen it as a protection of the use class and so on. And we again implore the Brompton to think again.
Okay, thank you. Now, I know that two of our number would like to say something. So Charlie O'Connor, who's my vice chair, but also who has a consummate knowledge of planning. Charlie, would you like to kick this off?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd just like to start by commending the work of the officers and lead member on this. I think they've done an extremely good job with the SPD, and I think it's going to become a sort of exemplar of how one puts down planning policy, or I don't know if I'm allowed to call it planning policy, but thoughts on a particular area. And what I wanted to find out is how we can use this exemplar for other areas in the borough and other sort of planning issues that the borough may face. And I wanted to hear the lead member's thoughts on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connor. And can I echo Councillor Pascal's point? I do think you have a consummate knowledge of planning issues. I'm grateful for the compliments about the SPD, and it's something that Councillor Pascal has also raised with me offline. I think there's a lot to learn from this process, and I'm happy to sit down with you and other members of the committee to talk about what exactly has gone well and what we can learn. I've been talking to officers. I think we're fortunate. I don't anticipate that the officers putting together the document are going anywhere just yet. So hopefully we can pick their brains. And we can apply this stuff to other places, because effectively it's a sort of site or area-based approach, and I'm sure there's scope to do similar for other high-profile sites that we do want to protect or enhance across the borough.
May I just ask one follow-up, Joan?
Of course you can.
Thank you. Could I hear a little bit about the labour and the expense that's involved in putting together an SPD like this, because it looks as though an awful lot of work has gone into it. I'm just trying to assess how practical it would be to replicate this in other sites.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't have a figure for the money involved. I suppose officers on the line may have a better one. My sense is, we started talking about this in kind of must have been January or February, and we're here in December consulting on something. So in terms of the labour, in the context of a work programme, and I accept that COVID has pushed things back at times, we are talking about 6 months, maybe 9 months in terms of the production of an SPD. So whilst it's something on high profile sites that we all have a very strong and clear view about, it's a really good way forward. It's not something that's replicable for every site of interest in the borough. Do officers want to comment on sort of specific resource? Those are sort of my overarching comments.
No, I think what you've said is absolutely correct. I mean, the whole intention, really, the whole thrust of where we want to get to is that we do more proactive planning rather than reactive planning. And so we do have a growth and delivery team that we've restructured and set up to do exactly this kind of work. And I think in terms of the benefit of this type of actually demonstrates that. But as you quite rightly pointed out, it is resource intensive. And in this case, we did have to commission a firm of consultants to advise us on viability and on medical uses that might be possible. So it does come at a cost. It comes at a cost in terms of officer time. If we have to get expert evidence, and in terms of planning, we normally have to do that because most documents have to be underpinned by robust evidence. Otherwise, they will be unpicked either by a planning inspector or a developer's barrister. So it is important that we do provide robust evidence. But in terms of priorities, I probably would say this, but I think it's incredibly important that we do provide robust documents in the borough. And I think they punch well above their weight in terms of the benefits that they provide. So I would say the money that we spent on this is money very well spent. And if you looked at the the development value of that site, and if it went to something that we didn't want it to go to, then how do you measure that? So I think it's really important that we carry on doing this kind of work.
And John, I suppose similar to that, we're progressing work on design codes like in Latimer Road, which is in some ways a similar process of sort of setting out and defining the kind of development we would find acceptable in an area. So there are different ways of skinning the cat. I think they're probably comparably intensive resource-wise, but just worth bearing in mind as an option for different places, particularly given government's aspiration to start delivering digital design codes.
Thank you.
Could I thank you very much for that answer? Could I ask Paul Lever from the, I think you're over here as Chelsea Society, is that correct?
Correct.
Would you like to say something now?
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the chance to address you. I'd like to join with those who've congratulated officers and the consultant on producing this document. We support it. We share your concern, if at all possible, to keep the Brompton Hospital here. And if that sadly doesn't prove possible, at least to ensure that the site is retained for medical use. Just want to add a couple of points. I think some councillors have already had their attention drawn to a study done by John Moynihan, a businessman who lives very near the hospital some years ago, who produced a very ambitious concept plan for a medical campus on the site of all the buildings that the hospital owns. I hope officers will have a look at that, because it's perfectly compatible with the planning document, but it offers a rather specific vision of how the site could be used to great advantage. Secondly, though, whatever happens, whether the Brompton stays or whether it goes, there will be a need for some kind of guiding mind to take forward the question of the use of the site. I think just to assume that if it's retained for medical purposes, the medical purposes will come would possibly be unreasonable. So somebody has to be driving forward whatever plan for the site is thought to be appropriate. And I think this means that you, RBKC, will have to play quite a proactive role in talking to the NHS, in talking, of course, to the Brompton, in talking to other potential users. I think you may have to regard yourselves as in the lead on ensuring either that the Brompton stays or that alternative medical uses, hopefully ambitious ones, can be found.
Thank you, Paul. Chair, if I may answer, can I just thank Paul and the Chelsea Society for their constructive engagement on this. I know they've shown real leadership within the community on the Brompton issue, and likewise to John Moynihan, who took the time to walk through his ideas for the site with me and one or two other councillors. I by way of assurance, I certainly think there's much to commend in John Moynihan's plan. The aspirations it sets out are entirely worthy and things that I can't imagine the council would do anything but support if we could find a way to bring it forward. So I'm greatly encouraged, and I certainly note that the point that the council has a proactive role to play. Paul will know that Councillor Kamali has been closely involved, and so from the public health and social care side of things, that there is a real enthusiasm about driving a positive solution forward that makes sure there isn't just sort of medical use facilitated, but medical use engaged on the site.
It's a very interesting discussion that, and thank you, Paul, for bringing in John Moynihan's. It's in this site happens to be in my ward, alongside with Kim Taylor-Smith and Josh Rundle as councillors, and he involved us in the discussion at the time. And I think we also want to pay tribute. As big a cost as producing the SPD was for the council, as far as I know, he paid for his work personally. So I definitely take my hat off to him for that. I think also that this is part of perhaps what we might like to look at as a wider discussion going forward, because as one of our MPs, Felicity Buchan, said the other day in a speech with regards to the planning white paper, that there was, in her view, and other people may not agree with this, but in her view, there was a lot of merit in the planning white paper. But what it didn't do is to recognise the local context and local knowledge to make that white paper relevant in different ways in different parts of the country. And it strikes me that this SPD has got the the sort of elements of that local context approach, which is very coherent, bringing together as it does cityscape making with transport and money and social good and all the different aspects of things as we as a council would want. So I would encourage the word lead member, get rid of the member. The leadership here might create some weather to make something very exciting to happen, which no doubt would involve the Brompton, the Marsden, hopefully the Brompton, but certainly the Marsden, the Institute of Cancer Research, Imperial, and Chelsea Westminster Trust as well. We've got one of the biggest computing facilities in the world on genetics behind the Marsden under the Imperial Health Group, and there's all sorts of other exciting stuff going on in the other health providers in that hub that exists already. So I think that even if the Brompton were to move out some of their facilities, that there's a big enough coherence there, a quantum, to create something else very exciting. And what really inspired me about the SPD, it showed, apparently, if I haven't read it wrong, that there are medical uses that can outbid residential uses in the free market. Now there's a learning curve for me, because I always assumed that buy-to-leave developers would outbid anybody, but maybe not on this occasion. So Johnny, please go forth and lead.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, the planning white paper, though it's not on the agenda, shall I just draw the committee's attention to, and John might help me here too. I understand there's a consultation just live on extending PD rights for the new use E-class buildings, which could mean that shops and other things can be converted into residential under permitted development. So I imagine that will be of some concern to committee, as it is on first glance to me, and I would encourage people to take an interest.
Is there any Article 4 provision in there? Has that been swept aside?
My understanding, and again, John, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we could still apply Article 4 directions if these policies are taken forward, but that we would obviously need to produce a large quantity of Article 4 directions if we're to retain the same controls. And
presumably the sort of evidence, I mean, what I'm thinking of here is actually to question the proposition that this SPD methodology couldn't be used on other sites, or broadly on a lot of sites. Maybe it has to be envisaged in a slightly different paradigm, where maybe developers help pay for it, or maybe we do it in advance. Maybe we have codes. Maybe the example you gave of Latimer Road might lend some thinking along those lines. But I definitely think this is an area that I hope my fellow members would support. Is this thinking of how we maximize the involvement of residents in envisaging what we want in our borough in the future, and enabling that to happen, and in fact leading developers to help solve problems rather than just reacting to them putting forward proposals. So it's more proactive. It's a very exciting area, and maybe we could talk, Johnny, offline about how we could develop some further scrutiny on this in the future.
Absolutely.
So thank you. I think there's somebody else. Yeah, Marwan, have you got your hand up?
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity here. I just want to thank for this comprehensive proposal, because we made the commitment to keep the Royal Brompton in the borough. And this commitment, I can see it being highlighted in a very clear way in a tangible financial document, as stated in the appendix. So I really thanks all the officers involved into shaping that document. And as you said, for the later scrutiny when this consultation completed, and hopefully we'll have our input, because we acknowledge that the Royal Brompton Hospital is not just a hospital or any hospital. It has the well-embedded research and long-term history in treatment very complex issues, health matters. So yeah, I welcome Johnny's work with the officers on this, and we'll give them our full support as a committee. And yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Anarchy. And I understand that the Adult Social Care Committee was also set to send a letter to the effect of wanting to retain the Brompton, and I thank you for, I'm sure, your timely sending of that.
Thanks, Johnny. Yeah, we did yesterday.
Everybody, thank you very much for that discussion, very positive. And we move on to A9, RBKC Biodiversity Action Plan. Now, Johnny, you good? Lead on this? I'm going to lead on this.
It's me again, Councillor.
Okay.
Yeah. So be relatively quick on this. So what the report kind of sets out is that we're developing a new biodiversity action plan, and really sets out why biodiversity is so important, both kind of globally and locally as well. What the biodiversity plan will actually include and hopes to achieve, and kind of the key steps or the key stages that are going to be delivered. So we aim to have the draft biodiversity action plan ready shortly, so that should be ready to circulate later this month, and we can circulate that to the committee. We just need to do some internal approvals first, but hopefully that will be ready by the end of this month, as I said, and then we'll aim to have the document signed off and launched, ready for the start of the financial year, so ready for April 2021 if we can. basically the vision for the biodiversity action plan is really just to protect, create and restore and enhance biodiversity in the borough. We're looking at really setting up have a look at the baseline as well of what we've got in the borough already. So look at the habitat assessments that will be conducted, but then really look at enhancing and improving the conditions of existing areas or local sites and have a dedicated plan for those. And then also look at creating new habitats as well across the borough. So ultimately, it will have the habitat action plans will be included in there, looking at all the different environments around that and having a dedicated plan for those. And then also looking at the different species as well and having species action plans. And an important point as well is we're looking at setting up the biodiversity partnership, and that's looking at having various kind of key stakeholders on board with subject experts, partners, community groups, plus the wider public as well, which will kind of really input into this action plan and kind of drive forward kind of progress and monitor how we're doing.
Thank you very much, Terry. Two quick points, if I might make. One is that under page 3, 511, cross-cutting themes, second point down, nature, health and well-being, might I suggest that you link into, or have you thought of linking into the Royal Borough's Health and Wellbeing Board, because that'll link you directly into public health and NHS partners, and their whole theme at the moment is to how to get the majority of the community, 85%, getting the physical and mental well-being to a good place, which will build the resilience of which the acute and long-term providers in the NHS can then do their job, because we know how essential it is for the community to basically look after itself. And that, I think, would provide you a very good way into that. The other aspect, looking outwards in a different direction, you mentioned schools or education, and the theme that might well work there is how to link food, and especially in primaries, and health and well-being, and how that links into the biodiversity element, because if we don't have, to quote my fellow councillor Waller Idris, if we don't have bees, we don't have food.
Completely agree, Councillor. Yep. So really good point. So Leanne Brisland, who is our ecology manager, is on the call as well, and we make a note of those. But we do have a representation on the Health and Wellbeing Board. So right. We definitely raise that, and working with schools on this is crucial, and especially around exciting kind of projects like the Bee Superhighway. Definitely want to engage those. Yeah.
If you want to suggest a couple of schools, get in touch offline.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for that paper. And we now need to move on to a
Chair, I would like to just make a quick point, Chair.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Pardon me.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Terry, for your very impressive and also informative and also ambitious biodiversity plan. However, I wanted to know, why are we going to cut down the trees in Warnington Centre? Because that's a very big issue. As part of the Warnington Green redevelopment, we should be encouraging green space growth. Is there anything that you can do to do that, or how can we improve that sort of situation?
Terry, I don't. How involved are you on that? Because I'm happy to cover it if helpful.
Go for it, John. Yeah, I agree. I think we do need to encourage as much green infrastructure and networks across the borough, but I'll let Johnny explain around that particular case.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Portia, thank you for the question. It is a really important issue, and I'm certainly alive and sensitive to that. Frankly, I think it's unfortunate that the permission was given 10 years ago that allows for the cutting of all of these trees in Warnington. I understand that happened in 2010, so long before either of us were elected, and therefore it's a real shame that there are very few legal tools at our disposal to stop the trees from being felled. What I can say is that I totally oppose their felling, and I would have done had I been on the council then. And in my capacity now, we are talking to Catalyst all the time and currently in dialogue with them about how trees can be retained. And we certainly hope that many of them can be. We don't have any power of compulsion, so it is a negotiation, but the council's view is unambiguous, that it wants to save as many of the trees as it can, if not all of them, and all of them would certainly be our preference. So that's something I hope to bring some good news on, and I regret that the situation has come to this.
Thank you, Johnny, for your hard work and your answer. Thank you.
Marie-Therese Rossi.
Just to let Portia know that it will be an item on the agenda at OSC on the 17th of December. Okay.
Thank you, Marie-Therese. That's a very firm answer. And hopefully Johnny can, by that time, have something to contribute to that debate. So thank you, everybody, on that item. Portia, I'm sorry I cut you off before you started. I didn't see your hand on my screen.
No problem, Chair. Thank you.
So the next item that we have to talk about is the Select Committee Work Programme. Now, I have to say that because of partly because of the delay in several of the elements that we were hoping to get earlier in the autumn, we haven't got quite as far with developing our programme as we'd hoped by now. But there have been some big contributions made, and the SPD and the other items that we've talked about. And to confirm that what we're going to be doing, I'm going to work priority with Ryan and I to structure an outline without content, but an outline of approach of how we're going to produce our end of year report, which will give us the working structure of how we want to focus in on some of the evidence that we've collected so far this year, which has been pretty wide ranging, and some of it's moving at pace, as we've heard from the 2030 progress report tonight. I will continue, for instance, to go to the Environment Sustainability Strategic Board. I will also, with Ryan, address some of the conversations, as was emphasised by Jackie Hurd earlier today, on addressing questions to directors. And what I would like to be able to do would be to invite individual members of the committee to come along on some of those discussions, so that they can then, if you like, act as the lead on a chapter in the overall report. I also feel that we've broadened out into a number of subject areas like planning and so on, and how that with the SPD, etc., and the white paper. And I think that what we now need to do is to restructure our thinking as to how that evidence we've gathered on a wider range of topics can shed light on what needs to go into our two main focus topics, and our one joint working one. The two main ones, just to repeat, are the carbon zero, but focusing on 2030, although we'll mention 2040 aspects. But we think we need to get our own house in order first before addressing the whole of the borough. And the other one is, broadly speaking, managing the street, creating and managing the street. But that includes such things as the SPD. It includes wardens and all the aspects of transport and so on that we've discussed. So I'm very clear and that we'll have a good report at the end of the year. But I think it behoves Ryan and other officers and myself to focus in on how we structure that in terms of working between us. And then we'll come back to you with a discussion about who works specifically on which bit. And that, by doing that, it means that we engage all of the councillors in this committee in the reports that we write, rather than just one or two. And then as we do that, we will pursue further engagement with people from outside, such as the Kensington and Chelsea Society, who've made big contributions to this committee, and other ways of communicating through to the residents. But if you think about the, in my ward, we have a thing called Cracker down the King's Road, which is the King's Road Residents Association, and it has 34 or 5 residents associations in an umbrella. Therefore, we can get down some really granular and fully engaging groups in that. So I look forward to leading that work for the next 3 months or so. So if anybody would like to, I think detailed discussion of how we work is really something that we need to do amongst us as a committee. But if anybody wants to ask a question at this point, I'd be very happy to field it. Okay, so if we could then move on to any other business. The subject of the cycle lane in Kensington High Street has become a topic in the last month or two, and a lively one, with a large number of residents on having a variety of views as to what ought to be happening. Now, what I wanted to do this evening was to I've taken advice from officers, and that if we wanted to discuss this in a formal way, what we need is a paper analysing what has been happening and why, and what the future is going to be to do with active travel in the borough, which is an ambition of the council. So in this instance, rather than just deferring it to the next meeting, I asked if I was able to put this under any other business, and I've been advised that yes, this is a good way of doing it, for a verbal report from the lead member, Johnny Thalassitis, who's offered to come and respond to that. And I know that we have one, as far as I understand it, local resident who wishes to ask a question of Johnny as well. So the structure of this will be is I'll first, as I'm doing now, ask Johnny to give us a verbal update on where we are and his view of what the next steps are going to be. Then I'll ask any councillors on this committee to ask questions. And then I'll ask the resident who's registered to come and ask a question of Johnny. If there's a lot of supplementary questioning, I think it would be better handled by him writing to Johnny with his wider questions, because we don't have, this is not the place for a debate on the subject without a proper paper circulated publicly beforehand. So Johnny, would you care to give us a briefing on where we are and what the next steps are likely to be?
Of course, Will. I suppose the first thing to say is that people will be familiar with the remarks I gave at full council that speak to sort of the direction of travel. No pun intended, I suppose. We are in the process of taking out the bike lane. That is something that I'm confident large majorities of our residents and businesses wanted. I think therefore that it's the right decision, and that we saw some evidence of greatly increased congestion immediately before the second lockdown that clearly raised anxieties amongst people that live, work and learn in the borough. But what I want to, I suppose, push back on is the idea that means that we're not doing enough for active travel, because I strongly refute that claim. It's one that I've seen in various places. We've introduced road closures from Portobello to Pavilion Road. We're looking at streetscape measures across the borough. We've introduced more school streets than before, though I note your leadership on it, Councillor Pascal, when you were the lead member, introducing our first pilot. And there's lots more to come. So our appetite to bring forward more walking and cycling schemes is, if anything, enhanced. And I look forward to working with residents and businesses across the borough on that. I know that the residents I've heard from, many of whom have huge opposition to the bike lane on Kensington High Street, have nevertheless said that they see walking and cycling as part of what the borough should promote, and I agree with them.
Okay, so the next part of this is councillors on this committee. Would anybody like to raise? The first hand I've got is Marwan's. I think Councillor Marwan and Elgi.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think, as you said, it's only fair to really discuss it when we have the full report. So at least we don't want just to have a debate, as you said. So, but thank you so much for acting on this in open remark, as you said. But just one question. I don't think we are cancelling the cycle lane as such, but we just move the pole, what they call it, the bullocks. Yeah, that's it. But we are reinforcing the lane, isn't it? So it will remain cycling lane. No, Johnny, just clarification. But I think it's fair to everyone, officers and Johnny, to have a full report to this committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Marwan. No, the plan is to return to the status quo ante, so to speak. But I'm certainly happy to discuss thinking and decisions openly with members of the committee. And I would, of course, refer you, Marwan, I'm sure you've read it, to the urgent decision report that was published last week, which sets out some of the thinking that has already gone on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny.
The next hand up is Councillor Erin Oretti. Would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Chairman. It's not really a question, but I completely agree with what Councillor El-Nagi just said, that it's probably not the right forum to have a debate or a questions. But also what Councillor Thalasitis and my colleague have just said about the local residents' opinions, their plans, and the objection against the cycling. To be very clear, Chairman, that the residents that we spoke to, and especially I spoke to, are not against the cycling, but it's just not working for the local community, and that's it. And opposing a cycling doesn't mean not promoting cycling, so they're two different things. So that's all I can say from my residents' feedback. And I totally support Councillor Johnny Thalasitis' decision, listening to local people, and to that I end my clear guidance on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oretti. And as we're both councillors for Holland Ward, I think it's reassuring to know that we're hearing similar things. It's clear to people in that part of the world that the cycle lane hasn't worked.
Okay. Now, is there anybody else who's a councillor on the committee who'd like? So, Portia, sorry, yes.
Yes, I want to thank Johnny for acting on residents' needs, and I commend him for his hard work. But what I'm very concerned about is the charging points for these cars. And lithium is very toxic. And basically, I read this article from Portugal where they laid a large amount of waste on the land. It was highly toxic. So I think we need to look into another kind of method of charging batteries, because I don't know how long this will last. And we need to consider another way of charging these electric cars, because this is not green technology.
Okay, well
we'll talk about this on a different scale, because I was just researching it in about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, so, no, and that's a helpful point, Portia. I understand you're the transport spokesperson for the Labour group, so I'm very happy to meet you offline to discuss it. And it would be helpful further to understand whether the Labour position is that the electric car charging points that we've been rolling out are the wrong way to go.
Okay, thank you, Johnny.
On that particular subject of charging, I think it'd be a good thing to have at scrutiny on another occasion. So if officers could take that on board, I mean, obviously it'd be good for you Johnny and Portia, to have your offline discussion on that particular question, on the technicalities of it. But I think the broader thing about the implementation of a wider, I mean, if national government is going to get rid of internal combustion engine sales on a much shorter time frame, it's going to increase the pace at which electric cars of some sort are going to come into the mix. And then the question is as to whether we go for local charging, centralized charging, or something else. But yeah, I think it's a subject that we need to air in scrutiny in the future. Now, if we don't have any more questions from our committee members or any other councillors who have joined us today, I have been asked through officers for Peter Golden, who is a resident, we understand, who's going to ask a question of Johnny. I think what I will say is just not to try to limit what he asks, but to keep it short, bearing the time we're at. And also, if he has supplementaries, to write to Johnny Thalasitis for a fuller answer, which I'm sure Johnny would be prepared to engage with. But Peter,
your care for public engagement. I'm Peter Golden from Ilchester Place, Johnny, and I'm asking about due process in closing the cycle lane. As the public want to say, and as you stress, Chair, care about our declared environment emergency, and some feedback is insufficient. Respecting this urgent public interest in health, safety, and fewer accidents. In a pandemic, Johnny, is 7 weeks long enough to assess if a cycle lane is helping shops when many of Kensington and Chelsea's older residents are shielding and premises were shut by law for 4 weeks of those 7 weeks? So not the normal situation. What criteria were used to assess the lane's benefits to all people? To be sure to hear responses representative of the borough as a whole, reflecting the fact, Johnny, that most households in Kensington and Chelsea do not have a car. Has the council consulted all local groups and employers, including schools, colleges, healthcare centres, theatres and museums? And don't you think you should have? How much time outside of lockdown did business and employers have to reply? And now, Johnny, how will safe, active travel be promoted on Kensington High Street? Thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me to put that question to Johnny.
Thank you, Peter, for the question. I suppose I'd start by referring you to the urgent decision report, which sets out a lot of the thinking and consultation that's gone into this whole process. I certainly regret your disappointment with how things have landed up, and I reiterate my desire to promote active travel across the borough. I think what was clear from all of the things that we heard is that the overwhelmingly people thought that the cycle scheme wasn't working. That in itself doesn't prohibit active travel, on any single road in the borough. In the future, it may be that longer term schemes work better. I think we have to look at it with a fresh pair of eyes now, and I'm very happy to meet you to go through some of the things that we're doing to promote the climate emergency and to make sure that we address the challenges those issues pose.
Thank you. And what I said earlier, thank you, Peter, for your question, and thank you, Johnny, for your answer. What I said earlier is that I think that there's probably more that, Peter, that you would find it useful to engage with Johnny in the first instance to have a more thorough discussion on this. And then also, I would suggest to my members, if you're agreed, that we revisit the whole subject of active travel at some future point. But I think that what we do need, which we've not been able to on this occasion, is to have a normal paper that can be formally circulated in normal scrutiny way to go through the policy and the carrying out of policy in terms of action and the engagement with residents and other organisations. I ask officers to take note of, unless anybody's got a wish not to, I'd ask officers to take note of the subject area and to plan it into the agenda for one of our meetings in the spring. But I think what's important is that we have a proper paper that we can address and scrutinise that engages the policy and the actions that are carried out on the broadest possible basis, including school travel plans and quiet ways and all the other aspects, as well as cycleways. Now I've got somebody who's got their hand up. Portia, I've found you this time.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter, for your question. Thank you, Johnny, because you've always been available to local residents' need. I just want to say, Peter, we need to take into consideration the load and the drop-off of the shops, because the front, the back, some of them don't have roads at the back where you can deliver certain products and stuff like that. And also we need to take into consideration the emergency services, because it was very it wasn't visible to me how could an ambulance or a fire brigade drive through that sort of situation. We need to consult the disabled people, those who wheelchairs, because I interviewed about maybe 15 and they said it was very difficult for them to actually cross the road. You know, the car drivers, so all local residents who use Kensington High Street, we need to take that into consideration, because all high streets are very different. So it's about going back to the drawing board and actually looking at ways in which we can promote active travel and cycling, because it's well needed and it's necessary, because a lot of residents do want it, but it's how we do it that's more important.
Yeah. Thank you, Portia. And I would only, following up on that, draw attention to the fact that we did consult statutory consultees, of course, and they included the emergency services, the ambulances, the fire brigades, and so on. And they all raised either concerns or outright objection to a man or a woman, as it were, with the cycle scheme. So that did bear on our thinking. And likewise, I met Action Disability and other charities and heard similar. So this was a broad-based push to take out the lanes that came from all over our community. And you know, sometimes councils are here to listen.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Unless anybody's got any other urgent item, I haven't had any requests for any other business items, so I think I take that as read as that we don't have any others. So it remains for me to say thank you to the officers who from governance and from policy support who've helped put this, and technical who've helped put this meeting together. They're the unsung heroes of this event, because they don't speak, they're not seen, but they make things happen. So I would like to say thank you to them, and thank you to everybody for participating in the meeting tonight. I apologise, it's gone on probably about half an hour longer than it should, but maybe that's for good reason, or my bad chairmanship. You can make up your mind. So this is the end of the meeting, and good night, and keep safe, and please keep our eye on the light at the end of the tunnel, but be careful in the meantime. I'm very worried about the rising cases in London. I think we need to be very responsible in what we do. So thank you very much indeed. Good night.
Good night, Chair.